I want you to take a second and just think about a really wild transformation.
Oh, okay.
Like picture the absolute most helpless version of yourself.
Yeah.
A babbling infant who, couldn't even hold up their own head, let alone feed themselves or navigate the world.
Right. Yeah. Literally zero survival skills.
Exactly. And now look at the incredibly complex problem-solving adult who is listening to this right now. Like, how did you get from there to here?
It's a massive jump.
It really is. Was that growth like a smooth, continuous upward curve, or was it more like a series of abrupt software updates to your brain, where suddenly you just woke up to a totally new reality?
That really is the ultimate human mystery, isn't it? We all undergo this immense metamorphosis, but the actual mechanics of how we become who we are.
And when it happens.
Yeah, exactly. When those big fundamental shifts happen, it's still highly debated.
Which honestly makes it the perfect mission for today's deep dive. We are going to map out the grand architecture of human development.
It's a huge topic.
It is. And we're pulling our material today from section 9.2 of chapter 9 from Psychology 2E. Because this topic is so massive, covering, everything from our personalities to our logic to our morals.
We need a good way to structure it.
Right. So I think the best way to tackle it is if I officially adopt the role of the student today. I've got my notebook ready. And I'm going to be asking a lot of questions.
I love that. And I will gladly take on the role of the lecturer. It gives us a really great framework to unpack the incredibly fascinating and, well, sometimes contradictory theories of how human beings develop.
Awesome. Okay, let's unpack this. As the lecturer, where do you start the timeline of human psychology? Like, where does the journey actually begin?
Well, if we're looking at the foundational history of developmental psychology, the timeline inevitably starts with Sigmund Freud.
Ah, Freud.
Yep, Freud and his psychosexual theory of development. He posited that development was completely discontinuous. He didn't see it as, like, a smooth continuum at all.
So more like the software updates.
Exactly. He proposed 5 distinct stages occurring in early childhood: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital.
Okay, I have to push back right out of the gate here, though.
Go for it.
Every time I read about the history of psychology, we start with Freud's psychosexual stages, and then immediately acknowledge that, well, modern research disputes almost all of it.
Yeah, that's true.
Even section 9.2 explicitly points out that he completely lacked empirical support. So if it's basically a debunk theory, why are we still studying him? Why does he get the opening slot?
No, that is a completely fair critique. We certainly do not study Freud's specific stages today as, like, a literal, actionable roadmap for raising children.
Right, I hope not.
But we study him because of the massive paradigm shift he initiated. Because before Freud came along, children were largely viewed by society as just, well, miniature, slightly defective adults.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, their inner lives weren't really considered deeply complex or formative. Freud planted a flag and argued that childhood experiences definitively and permanently shape adult personality.
So he basically introduced the concept that early life is the absolute crucible of human development.
Precisely. He built the foundation.
Even if the house he built on top of it had to be, torn down later.
That is a great way to put it. And the person who came along and built a much more resilient house on that foundation was Erikson.
Okay, Erikson.
Yeah. Erikson was also a stage theorist, but he took Freud's basic premise and completely revolutionized it. Instead of focusing on sexual urges, Erikson shifted the focus to our social nature.
Creating the psychosocial theory of development, right?
Exactly. And, crucially, Erikson argued that development absolutely does not stop when you turn 5 or 12. It continues across your entire lifespan right up until the end of life.
I mean, I find that concept inherently more optimistic. The idea that my personality isn't just permanently locked in based on something that happened in preschool.
Right, you're always evolving.
But what is the actual mechanism driving that lifelong change?
Well, Erikson proposed that human beings are constantly driven by an internal need to achieve competence. He actually mapped out 8 distinct stages of human life.
8 stages. Got it.
And at every single stage, we face a specific conflict or what he called a primary psychosocial task. If we successfully navigate the task, we gain a sense of competence and add a healthy building block to our personality.
And if we don't?
If we fail to resolve the conflict, we develop feelings of inadequacy that just linger.
Reading through the 8 stages in the textbook, the mechanics of it immediately reminded me of a video game.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, it's as if your life is a series of distinct levels. And at the end of each level, you have to defeat a specific boss. which is that psychosocial conflict.
Okay, I like this.
Yeah, and if you defeat the boss, your character gets a permanent stat buff, like competence, independence, or confidence. But if you fail the encounter, you don't necessarily get game over.
You just carry a debuff.
Exactly. Yeah. You carry a debuff, like shame or guilt or isolation, with you into the next level, making the rest of the game significantly harder.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. So let's look at how those bucks and debuffs play out in reality. Level 1 is infancy, so from birth to roughly 12 months.
Okay, what's the boss fight here?
The primary conflict is trust versus mistrust. Because infants are entirely dependent on their caregivers for survival, the task is essentially figuring out, is this world a safe place?
So if a caregiver is responsive and meets their needs, the infant gains the buff of trust.
Exactly. They view the world as predictable and secure. But if the caregiver is unresponsive, the infant carries the debuff of anxiety and mistrust forward.
Which leads right into the toddler level, ages 1 to 3. The conflict is autonomy versus shame and doubt.
Yes, and this is deeply relatable for anyone who has spent time with a 2-year-old. This is the classic me-do-it phase.
Oh, totally.
The child is suddenly realizing they have agency, right? They can act on their environment. A perfect example is a toddler insisting on dressing themselves.
Oh, yeah. Even if they choose to wear, like, polka dot pants with a striped shirt and rain boots on a sunny day.
Exactly. And based on Erikson's model, if the parent steps back and lets them wear that chaotic outfit, the child defeats the boss.
They earn the autonomy buff, building their foundational independence.
Right, but if the parents over-control the situation, constantly stepping in to fix things, and denying the child that choice...
The child internalizes that they aren't capable. They carry shame and self-doubt into preschool.
And you can see how carrying a debuff of self-doubt would make later stages much harder to navigate.
Let's fast forward to a notoriously turbulent level. Adolescence, ages 12 to 18.
Oh boy.
The task here is identity versus role confusion.
The quintessential teenage crisis. Basically, who am I and where do I fit in?
Exactly. Teenagers actively experiment. They try on different selves, like changing clothes, shifting between different friend groups, hobbies, ideologies.
All to figure out who they actually are. Right. The primary goal is to forge a strong, unified sense of self. If they achieve that, they can stand firm in their values, even when challenged by peers.
But if they fail, maybe because they're apathetic or, I don't know, overbearing parents, force a specific path onto them.
Then they suffer from role confusion. They essentially step into adulthood without a compass.
Which explains why the subsequent level, young adulthood, is so risky if you didn't figure out your identity. Because the conflict in young adulthood is intimacy versus isolation.
Yes, and it makes logical sense, doesn't it?
Totally. You cannot effectively share your life with someone else if you don't even possess a solid understanding of who you are.
You are recognizing the exact cascading causality Erikson warned about. A strong self-concept is a prerequisite for healthy intimacy.
Or else you risk emotional isolation.
Precisely. And this ripple effect continues all the way to the final stage, late adulthood, from age 65 onward. The conflict is integrity versus despair.
That's the moment of looking back at your saved game and seeing if you got a high score.
Essentially, yes. It is a period of reflection. If you look back and feel a sense of pride in your contributions in your relationships, you experience integrity.
You face the twilight of life with a sense of peace and, like, few regrets.
But if your reflection is dominated by feelings of wasted time, the whole would have, should have, could have mindset, it leads to a profound bitterness and despair.
Man, it's a cohesive, though somewhat heavy, framework for our social and emotional development.
It definitely is.
But I want to pivot here, because Erikson's theory relies on a person having the cognitive capacity to actually process these conflicts.
Right.
And a 2-year-old doesn't just experience emotions differently than a 30-year-old. The actual machinery of their thought process is entirely different. So how do we explain the evolution of our logic?
Well, to understand the machinery of thought, we have to turn to the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget.
Okay, Piaget.
While Erikson focused on the social self, Piaget dedicated his life to cognitive development. And his most profound realization was that children are not merely empty vessels waiting to be filled with adult knowledge.
They aren't just mini adults.
Exactly. They actively think and reason using an entirely different operating system than adults do.
And the core concept of that operating system is what he calls schemata, right?
Yes, schemata. You can think of schemata as mental blueprints or file folders. They are the categories we create to understand and organize the world.
Okay.
As a child encounters new information, they have to fit it into their mental architecture using one of two processes: assimilation or accommodation.
Section 9.2 provides a really valid example of this using a toddler named Abdul. So 2-year-old Abdul has a Labrador retriever at home.
Right.
He builds a schema for dog that basically equates to furry, 4 legs animal. One day he's out and sees a sheep for the very first time. He immediately points at it and yells, "Look, mommy, dog."
Classic assimilation.
Yeah. He took this brand new piece of information, the sheep, and just crammed it into his existing file folder for dog. He assimilated it because it roughly fit the criteria.
Assimilation is definitely the path of least cognitive resistance. But then Abdul's mother corrects him. She says, "No, Abdul, that's a sheep."
Mind blown.
Totally. Now, Abdul faces a state of cognitive dissonance. His existing blueprint for the world is suddenly flawed. To resolve this, he has to do the harder work of accommodation.
So he has to actively alter his existing schema for dog to exclude sheep and construct an entirely new file folder for sheep.
Piaget argued that human intelligence grows through this constant, oscillating dance of assimilation and accommodation.
And he believed this dance happened across 4 distinct cognitive stages.
Yes, 4 stages.
Let's explore the mechanisms of those stages, because the way children think is utterly baffling until you understand the underlying logic. Stage 1 is the sensorimotor stage, right? From birth to roughly 2 years old.
Correct. In this phase, there is no abstract thought. The child learns about the world strictly through physical interaction.
Through their senses and motor behavior.
Exactly. They taste things, grab things, shake things. The defining cognitive milestone of this stage is the development of object permanence.
Which is the classic test where you hide a toy under a blanket.
Yes. Before about 5 to 8 months of age. If you hide a brightly colored toy under a blanket while an infant is watching, they don't even look for it.
Wait, really?
Yeah. To them, the object literally ceased to exist the moment it left their field of vision. Out of sight means out of reality.
That is wild.
But once they acquire object permanence, their brain has updated. They understand the toy still exists independently of their perception, and they will reach under the blanket.
Oh, wow.
And intriguingly, the arrival of object permanence directly coincides with the onset of stranger anxiety.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about schemata. The baby finally has a permanent mental file for their parents' faces. So when a stranger leans over the crib, the baby tries to assimilate that face, fails, realizes they cannot predict what this unknown entity will do, and naturally starts crying from the uncertainty.
That is the exact mechanism. Now, once they age out of the sensorimotor stage, they enter the preoperational stage, lasting from roughly ages 2 to 7.
This is the stage I find the most fascinating. Language explodes, and pretend play just becomes their reality. A cardboard box is genuinely a spaceship.
Absolutely.
Yet, basic adult logic is entirely offline.
It is a stage defined by what the child cannot do yet. 2 major cognitive limitations dominate here: egocentrism and a lack of conservation.
Okay, let's illustrate egocentrism with a textbook's example of the siblings, Kenny and Kaiko.
Good example.
In Piaget's terms, egocentrism doesn't mean the child is selfish. It means they physically cannot conceive of a perspective outside their own.
Right, they can't step into someone else's shoes.
So little Kenny goes to buy a birthday present for his older sister, Kaiko. He proudly selects an Iron Man action figure.
Which she probably doesn't want.
Exactly. He doesn't buy it because Kaiko likes Iron Man. He buys it because he likes Iron Man, and his brain assumes his internal preferences are universal facts.
He literally cannot project himself into her mind. And the lack of conservation is equally revealing.
How so?
Well, conservation is the logical understanding that changing the visual appearance of an object does not change its fundamental quantity or volume.
Okay.
Imagine a father giving 10-year-old Kaiko a slice of pizza and giving 3-year-old Kenny a slice of the exact same size.
Sounds like a recipe for a fight.
Oh, it is. Because the father uses a cutter to slice Kenny's piece into 5 smaller chunks. Kenny immediately starts bragging that he received more food than his sister.
Even though he watched the father cut it. It's wild.
It's hilarious, but it's true.
But it's because Kenny lacks the cognitive machinery of reversibility. His brain cannot mentally rewind the action of the pizza cutter to realize the mass remains identical. He just sees 5 pieces versus 1 piece, and, well, 5 is bigger than 1.
Which brings us naturally to stage 3, the concrete operational stage, roughly ages 7 to 11. This is when that specific machinery finally comes online.
Ah, so they grasp conservation?
They do. They understand reversibility, that pouring water from a short, fat glass into a tall, skinny glass doesn't magically create more water.
So logic begins to govern their thought processes.
Yes, but with a major caveat. They can only apply this logic to concrete, tangible things they can see or touch.
So abstract concepts are still out of reach.
Right. That capacity doesn't arrive until the final stage, the formal operational stage, from age 11 into adulthood. This is where hypothetical reasoning and complex abstract logic emerge.
But what I love about the textbook's description here is that this new brain power comes with a weird side effect, like a renewed sense of egocentrism.
No, it is a fascinating phenomenon because teenagers suddenly develop the capacity to think about thinking metacognition and can imagine elaborate hypothetical scenarios. They start imagining hypothetical audiences.
Oh, I remember this.
Right. A teenager discovers a microscopic pimple on their chin, and their advanced formal operational brain immediately conjures a scenario where every single person in the school cafeteria is staring exclusively at that blemish.
It's the cognitive burden of overthinking. Now, I have a major question here. Does Piaget's model imply that our cognitive development just hits a ceiling at age 11?
That's a great question.
Like it's formal operational, the final software update we ever get?
Well, Piaget largely believes so, but modern developmental psychologists have forcefully pushed back on that endpoint.
Good, because that would be depressing.
What's fascinating here is they recognized a missing piece and proposed a fifth stage, the post-formal stage.
So cognitive growth does continue into adulthood.
Yeah.
What does post-formal thought look like?
In the formal operational stage, logic is very rigid and black and white. But in the post-formal stage, adults learn to integrate logic with emotion.
Oh.
They understand that truth is often context-dependent. For instance, a teenager might argue a strict point of absolute fairness. But a post-formal adult realizes that the logical way you handle a furious disagreement with a coworker must be fundamentally different from how you handle a furious disagreement with your spouse.
So you draw on past experiences to navigate gray areas.
Yeah.
It's basically the transition from raw logic to wisdom.
Exactly. And the textbook also highlights a modern paradigm called neuroconstructivism, which adds a biological layer to all of this.
Neuroconstructivism.
Yes. It suggests that cognitive development isn't just invisible mental software updating in a void. It's our physical brain hardware wiring itself based on our experiences.
Really?
Yeah, our genetics, our bodily interactions, and our social environments are all engaged in a bidirectional feedback loop. If an infant explores a stimulating environment, their neural pathways physically alter.
It beautifully resolves the old nature versus nurture debate by demonstrating that they aren't competing forces. They're collaborative builders of the human mind.
Exactly.
Speaking of the environment building the mind, though, I notice a huge gap in Piaget's theory.
Oh, what's that?
Well, he paints a picture of a child as a solitary little scientist, independently experimenting with blocks and pizza slices to figure out the universe. But human beings don't grow up in isolation. Does the surrounding culture dictate how the machinery of thought develops?
That critique is exactly why we must introduce the Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky looked at Piaget's solitary scientist model and argued it completely missed the forest for the trees.
So what did he propose?
He proposed the sociocultural theory of development. Vygotsky asserted that human development is inextricably rooted in culture and history. A child's cognitive development is not an independent journey.
It's shaped by the people around them.
Directly shaped by the social interactions and cultural tools available to them.
But how does that actually work in practice? Like, how does a cultural tool alter a biological brain?
Take language, for example. Piaget viewed language mostly as a way for children to express what they had already figured out. Vygotsky viewed language as the very operating system of thought itself. Think about how a child talks out loud to themselves while trying to tie their shoes.
Oh, yeah, they narrate everything.
Right. Vygotsky argued that this social speech eventually becomes internalized. It becomes their inner voice. Therefore, the specific language, values, and categories provided by a child's culture literally dictate the boundaries of how they are able to think.
Oh, wow.
If a culture possesses a rich vocabulary for communal relationships, the child's cognitive schemata for community will be vastly more complex than a child raised in a highly individualistic culture.
That makes a lot of sense. So we have Erikson explaining our lifelong quest for identity and competence. We have Piaget mapping the gears of our logic. And we have Vygotsky showing how culture writes the code for those gears.
We're building a complete picture.
But there is one massive pillar left to explore. How do all of these systems combine to figure out right from wrong? How does morality develop?
Ah, to explore moral development, we look at the work of Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg theorized that morality evolves in distinct stages, much like cognitive ability.
Did he have, like, a multiple-choice test for morality?
Huh! No, he couldn't measure morality that simply. Instead, he presented subjects with complex moral dilemmas, and the most famous of these is the Heinz dilemma.
Oh, I've heard of this.
I will pose it directly to you and to you listening right now.
Okay, I'm ready. Lay it on me.
In a town in Europe, a woman is near death from a rare form of cancer. There is one specific drug that doctors believe might save her, recently discovered by a local pharmacist.
Okay.
The drug costs the pharmacist $200 to manufacture, but he is fiercely price gouging, charging $2,000 for a single dose.
Wow.
The sick woman's husband, Heinz, goes to everyone he knows to borrow money, but he can only scrape together $1,000.
Half of it.
Right. He goes to the pharmacist, explains his wife is dying, and begs him to sell it cheaper or let him pay the risk later. The pharmacist refuses, stating he discovered it and intends to maximize his profit.
Ugh, terrible guy.
Desperate, Heinz breaks into the pharmacy that night and steals the drug for his wife. So should Heinz have done that?
Man, that is brutal. My immediate instinct is, yes, he absolutely should have stolen it because a human life is worth more than money.
Okay.
But breaking and entering is fundamentally illegal. So it's tough.
Well, the brilliance of Kohlberg's methodology is that he did not care whether you answered yes or no.
We didn't.
The binary choice was irrelevant. He was only interested in the reasoning you used to arrive at your answer. Based on thousands of responses, he identified 3 primary levels of moral reasoning.
That's level 1.
Level 1 is pre-conventional morality, typically seen before age 9. At this level, morality is dictated entirely by a fear of punishment or a desire for reward.
So a pre-conventional answer would be, Heinz shouldn't steal the drug because the police will catch him and he will go to jail. It's pure self-preservation.
Correct. Level 2 is conventional morality, which develops in early adolescence. Here, moral reasoning is driven by a desire for social approval and a strict adherence to authority and laws.
So a conventional thinker might argue, Heinz shouldn't steal the drug because stealing is explicitly against the law and society falls apart if we don't obey the laws.
Exactly. The morality of the rule book.
And the highest level.
Level 3 is post-conventional morality. At this stage, reasoning transcends written laws and is driven by universal ethical principles. A person balances social order against fundamental human rights.
Which is the reasoning I used earlier. Like, Heinz should steal the drug because the universal value of a human life inherently overrides a pharmacist's property rights or desire for profit.
Spot on.
While that framework is elegant, the textbook makes a really sharp observation about human nature here. It points out the massive chasm between moral reasoning and moral behavior.
The difference between talking the talk and walking the walk.
Yes. I can sit here in a comfortable studio and utilize high-minded post-conventional reasoning about universal ethics. But if I'm actually thrust into a high-stress, terrifying situation, my actual behavior might snap right back to pre-conventional survival mode.
I mean, that's incredibly common.
Right. I might just do whatever keeps me out of trouble in that exact second.
It exposes a profound human vulnerability. We possess the cognitive capacity for elevated moral philosophy, but in the heat of the moment, our primal instincts often commandeer our decision-making.
So what does this all mean? This leads me to a broader question about these massive theories.
Yeah.
Erikson, Piaget, Kohlberg, they sound incredibly comprehensive. But psychology is notorious for its historical blind spots. Did Kohlberg miss anything in his moral framework?
He missed something monumental.
Really?
Kohlberg's research had a glaring flaw in its dataset. He primarily studied upper-class white men and boys.
Ah.
When he occasionally presented his moral dilemmas to female subjects, he found that they frequently answered differently than his male subjects did. Because they didn't align with his established scale, Kohlberg actually concluded that women were generally deficient in their moral reasoning capabilities.
Wait, really? That is an incredibly arrogant leap of logic.
It was a massive failure of objectivity. Fortunately, Carol Gilligan, who was actually a research assistant of Kohlberg's, identified this bias and challenged it.
Good for her.
She published a groundbreaking book called In a Different Voice. Gilligan argued that women are not morally deficient. They simply construct their moral frameworks from a fundamentally different foundation.
So.
While male socialization often emphasizes abstract rules, justice, and individual rights, female socialization frequently emphasizes interpersonal relationships, care, and staying connected.
Section 9.2 applies Gilligan's critique directly to the Heinz dilemma, and it completely reframes the scenario.
It really does.
Because Kohlberg's rule-focused perspective says, steal the drug, life outweighs property. But Gilligan highlighted that a care-focused perspective looks deeply at the collateral damage of the action.
Yes.
Like, if Heinz steals the drug, he becomes a criminal. If he is sent to prison, who is going to take care of his profoundly sick wife? She might die alone while he is locked in a cell.
It is a brilliant counter-perspective. It demonstrates that prioritizing interpersonal connection and long-term care is every bit as complex and morally mature as prioritizing an abstract equation of justice.
Wow.
Gilligan provided a necessary and massive correction to the field, proving that there are multiple valid peaks to human development.
Well, stepping out of the student role for a moment, we have covered an immense journey today. We started with Freud planting the flag for childhood development, moved through Erikson's lifelong battles for competence,
Explored Piaget's shifting gears of logic,
right, acknowledged Vygotsky's cultural programming, and finally navigated the deeply complex moral landscapes mapped by Kohlberg and corrected by Gilligan.
It truly reveals the grand architecture we set out to map.
And for you listening, understanding this architecture is like acquiring a cheat code for human behavior. It isn't just academic trivia. When a toddler has a complete meltdown over wearing mismatched shoes, you now understand they aren't just being difficult.
They are fighting an essential battle of autonomy versus shame.
Exactly. When a teenager drives you crazy, trying on weird new personalities, you recognize the vital work of identity formation. It might even provide context for your own internal search for purpose right now, that midlife drive for generativity versus stagnation.
It ultimately grants you a profound empathy for the human condition because you realize we are all simply trying to navigate the specific cognitive and social tasks of our current stage.
Wonderfully said.
But I want to leave you with one final forward-looking thought to mull over. We discussed neuroconstructivism, the reality that our physical brains wire themselves based on the environments we actively explore. And Piaget demonstrated that we build our entire mental models based on physical interactions with the world around us. So consider this. What happens to the architecture of human development in an era where a child's primary environment is no longer physical, but increasingly digital and virtual?
Oh, wow.
If the primary world they interact with exists behind a piece of glass, how will their neural pathways wire themselves? How will the next great psychological theory define the stages of a mind raised entirely on the internet?